It is the second week of September, 1944. Two American offensives are converging on the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur is preparing to land at Leyte in October, and to protect the eastern flank of that invasion, the Pacific Fleet has been ordered to take the Palau Islands, at the western end of the Caroline chain. The main objective is Peleliu, near the southern tip of the group, a coral island 6 miles long and about 2 miles wide, roughly 500 miles east of the Philippines. It holds the best Japanese airfield in the region. The operation is named Stalemate II. The assault force is the 1st Marine Division, veterans of Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, with the Army's 81st Infantry Division in support. On September 13th, 2 days before the landing, Admiral William Halsey sends a flash message to Pacific Fleet headquarters. His carrier raids have found Japanese air power in the region far weaker than expected, and he recommends canceling the Palau operation outright. "Am firmly convinced," he writes, "Palau not now needed to support occupation of Philippines." Halsey's message allows one exception. Ulithi, an undefended atoll to the northeast with a vast natural anchorage, is worth taking. Everything else in the Western Carolines, in his judgment, can be bypassed and left to starve, the way Rabaul has been. Admiral Chester Nimitz says no. The bombardment ships are already on station. The minesweepers are already working the approaches, and the underwater demolition teams are already in the water. Canceling an amphibious operation 2 days out carries risks of its own, and Nimitz has given his word to MacArthur that the flank will be covered. The landing will proceed on schedule. Waiting on the island are about 10,500 Japanese, some 5,500 soldiers of the 14th Infantry Division under Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, along with naval troops and construction laborers. For 6 months, they have been cutting the coral ridges north of the airfield into a fortified zone of roughly 500 caves, connected by tunnels, some of them sealed behind sliding armored doors. Their orders mark a change in Japanese doctrine. There will be no mass charge to destroy the Americans at the waterline. The garrison will fall back into the high ground and make the battle a matter of attrition. Aboard the flagship, Major General William Rupertus briefs his officers and the press. "Rough but fast," he tells them. "We'll be through in 3 days. It might take only 2. Of the 36 correspondents accredited to cover the landing, only 6 will stay through the critical early days of the battle. The fight for Peleliu will last 74 days. This is the story of the men who fought it." For 3 days, the battleships and cruisers worked the island over. On the evening before the landing, the bombardment commander, Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, reports that his ships have run out of targets. The assessment is honest, and it is wrong. The targets have not been destroyed. They have been dug beyond the reach of naval guns. The men in the transports know none of this. What they have been told is that the preparation has been thorough. The island is small, and the operation will be short. Among the riflemen and mortarmen of the 5th Marines waiting to load is Corporal Eugene Sledge of Mobile, Alabama, 20 years old, a replacement about to make his first landing. His account of the next 74 days, written decades later, will become one of the most read soldiers' memoirs of the Second World War. Nakagawa's fire plan is a study in discipline. Through 3 days of bombardment, his heavy weapons in the ridges stay silent, their positions unrevealed, their crews underground. The guns are sighted not to defend the beaches, but to punish them. Registered on the reef, the surf line, and the first 100 yards of sand, waiting for the one morning when those coordinates will be full of Americans. The morning of September 15th is clear and already hot. At 8:30, the first waves of amphibian tractors cross the reef toward the western beaches. White 1 and 2 on the left, orange 1, 2, and 3 on the right. The moment they cross the reef, the silent guns open. Artillery and mortar fire begins falling among the tractors in the water, and anti-boat guns firing along the length of the beach catch them as they climb ashore. Tractors take direct hits in the water and burn with their crews and passengers aboard. Others reach the sand and are destroyed backing off it. The men who get ashore find the beaches enfiladed from both flanks, and the shallow ground behind them swept by fire from the ridges inland. By nightfall, dozens of tractors are burning on the reef and the sand, and the division has lost 1,111 men on the first day, 209 of them killed. On the far left of the landing, a coral promontory rises about 30 feet above the water's edge, studded with casemated guns firing down the beaches. The Marines' maps call it the Point. King Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, under Captain George Hunt, is assigned to take it. Hunt's company fights up the rock with rifles, grenades, and smoke, destroys the casemates from behind, and then holds the point for 26 hours, cut off from the rest of the regiment against repeated counterattacks. When the position is finally secured, more than 400 Japanese dead lie around it. Of Hunt's 235 men, 78 are still standing. In the afternoon, the Japanese launch their largest conventional counterattack of the battle. Tanks and infantry driving across the open airfield toward the beachhead. The Marines meet them with everything on the island: naval gunfire, artillery, Sherman tanks, and dive bombers. The main attack is destroyed in well under an hour, though smaller thrusts continue into the night. It is the last time the defenders of Peleliu will offer themselves as targets in the open. That night the temperature barely falls. The men dig where the coral allows, which in most places is not at all, and pile rock instead. The battle Rupertus expected to win in 3 days has gained a beachhead a few hundred yards deep. On the second morning, the 5th Marines attack straight across the open airfield. There is no cover on a runway. The Japanese in the ridges to the north can see every man on it, and they fire artillery, mortars, and machine guns into the crossing for its full length. The Marines run through it in groups, hunched forward against the fire as men hunch against rain. Sledge made the crossing with K Company and set down what it was like. The world was a nightmare of flashes, violent explosions, and snapping bullets. He would write later that he considered it the worst combat experience of his entire war, worse than anything that came after, and a great deal came after. The airfield falls that day, and with it the flat southern half of the island. Within 2 weeks, American engineers have the runway operating, and Marine corsairs are flying strikes from it against the ridges a mile to the north in some of the shortest combat missions ever flown, airborne for minutes at a time, cycling their landing gear, and turning straight back into the pattern. By the standards of the plan, the battle is on schedule. Then the men look north. At the ground the maps had smoothed over. The heat now becomes an enemy in its own right. Daytime temperatures climb well past 100 degrees, on the worst days near 115. The invasion planners, expecting a short fight, shipped much of the division's drinking water ashore in 55-gallon steel drums that had previously held fuel and had not been properly cleaned. The water comes out of them fouled with oil. Men drink it anyway, and retch, and drink again. Heat prostration begins putting Marines out of action at a rate that rivals the Japanese guns. Everything the battle consumes has to come in over the same reef the assault crossed. Amphibian tractors and DUKW trucks shuttle ammunition and water ashore and carry the wounded back out, first to the transports, later to the hospital ship anchored offshore. The route runs both ways all day, every day, under observation from the ridges, for as long as the battle lasts, and at night the other battle begins. The Japanese do not counterattack in force again, but small groups of infiltrators come down from the ridges every night of the campaign, into the foxholes and the gun pits and the artillery positions, with grenades, bayonets, and knives. The Marines learn to fight the nights in pairs, one man sleeping while the other watches, and to treat any movement after dark as hostile. No position on Peleliu is ever entirely a rear area, and no night of the campaign passes without killing somewhere along the line. North of the airfield, the ground rises into the Umurbrogol, a mass of parallel coral ridges, cliffs, and sinkholes, stripped of vegetation by the bombardment, honeycombed with Nakagawa's caves. On the American maps, it is a single modest elevation. On the ground, it is a maze of rock walls up to 300 feet high, where every draw is a fire lane, and every crest is registered by mortars on the next one. The Marines who fight there give it the name that lasts: Bloody Nose Ridge. Colonel Lewis Puller's 1st Marines are ordered into it frontally, ridge by ridge. The regiment attacks for 6 days. The pattern repeats with small variations. A company works up a slope under mortar fire, taking casualties from cave positions it cannot see. If it reaches the crest, it finds the reverse slope and the next ridge already registered, and fire coming from caves behind and beneath it. From ground it thought it had cleared. The stretcher parties carrying the wounded back down draw fire of their own, and it can take 4 men the better part of an hour to move one casualty a few hundred yards to the rear. Gains are measured in hundreds of yards, and some of them are given back by nightfall. Major Raymond Davis's 1st Battalion, in the center of the attack, will end the week with 71% casualties, the highest of any battalion on the island. On September 19th, Captain Everett Pope's company of the 1st Battalion is ordered to take Hill 100, a ridge the maps show as an isolated knob. Pope reaches the top at dusk with about 90 men and discovers the maps are wrong. The hill is the exposed nose of a long ridge, and higher ground beyond it looks straight down on his position. The Japanese attack all night. Toward dawn, out of grenades and nearly out of ammunition, Pope's men fight with knives, fists, and chunks of coral, and throw ammunition boxes and rocks down the slope. By dawn, barely a dozen men are left on the hill with him. When the order to withdraw finally comes, Pope brings them down. He receives the Medal of Honor. By September 21st, the arithmetic can no longer be argued with. The 1st Marines have taken 1,749 casualties, about 70% of the regiment. Some rifle companies are the size of platoons, and some platoons no longer exist. Cooks, drivers, and headquarters clerks have been fed into the line as riflemen. Puller, hobbled by a flare-up of the thigh wound he has carried since Guadalcanal, runs his regiment from a forward post inside mortar range and keeps attacking, because those are his orders. Rupertus insists his division can still finish the job alone, without army help. His corps commander, Major General Roy Geiger, comes ashore, visits the 1st Marines lines, reads the casualty returns, and overrules him on the spot. The 1st Marines are taken off the line and out of the battle, and a regiment of the Army's 81st Division is brought in to replace them. The regiment that landed on White Beach 6 days earlier has ceased to exist as a fighting force. The campaign now changes character. There will be no more attempts to carry the Umurbrogol by frontal assault. What remains of Nakagawa's garrison, a few thousand men, is compressed into a pocket about 400 yards wide and roughly 1,000 yards long, and the Americans begin taking it apart the slow way. Artillery firing point blank into cave mouths, tanks and flamethrower tractors working the draws, engineers sealing entrances with demolition charges, one position at a time. On September 28th, the 5th Marines make a second landing, crossing the narrow strait north of Peleliu in amphibian tractors to take the neighboring island of Ngesabus and its fighter strip. Marine corsairs fly cover so close that their strafing runs end a few hundred yards ahead of the tractors. The island falls in 2 days. It is one of the cleanest operations of the campaign, and one of the few that goes the way the manuals say it should. In the pocket, nothing goes the way the manuals say it should. The 5th and 7th Marines take their turns in the ridges through the first half of October, against places whose names are earned rather than surveyed: the Horseshoe, the Five Sisters, the Wildcat Bowl, the China Wall. In the floor of the Horseshoe lie the only fresh water pools on that part of the island, and men fight for them under the guns of 3 ridges, because both sides are drinking from the same ground. Tanks and flame tractors stand off and burn the cave mouths, at ranges the infantry cannot survive, and behind them the engineers move up with demolition charges to close what the flames have emptied. Some caves are cleared 3 times before they stay clear. The casualty lists grow by dozens each day for gains of 100 yards. By mid-October, the 1st Marine Division as a whole has lost over 6,000 men, and Geiger's headquarters ends its part in the battle. The division is withdrawn to rebuild. The 81st Division, the Wildcats, takes over the pocket. The soldiers finish it with siege methods and patience through the last half of October and all of November, in the rain that finally replaces the heat. The Wildcats advance behind sandbag walls, pushed forward a few feet at a time, use armored bulldozers to cut roads for the tanks into the draws, and lay a 300-yard pipeline with booster pumps to project burning fuel oil into positions the flame tractors cannot reach. It is slow, and it is meant to be slow. The days of trading a company for a ridge are over. On November 24th, with his perimeter reduced to a few caves and his effective strength to a few dozen men, Colonel Nakagawa signals his superiors that his sword is broken, his spears are gone, and his regiment's colors have been burned. That night, the operator on the undersea cable to headquarters at Koror transmits the station's call sign one final time, "Sakura, Sakura," and the line goes dead. Nakagawa and Major General Kenjiro Murai, the senior army advisor on the island, take their own lives. 3 days later, on November 27th, the island is declared secure. The assault that was to have lasted 3 days has lasted 74. The cost is counted in ranges because the records themselves disagree at the margins. On Peleliu itself, more than 1,500 Americans are killed in action, close to 1,800 dead across the operation as a whole, with some 8,000 wounded and thousands more felled by heat, disease, and combat fatigue. The 1st Marine Division's casualties, about 6,500 men, are a third of the division. Of the Japanese garrison of some 10,500, roughly 19 soldiers surrender during the battle. Nearly all the rest are dead. For the first time in the Pacific War, a Japanese island garrison has inflicted close to 1 American casualty for every man it lost. It is a formula the defenders of Iwo Jima and Okinawa will repeat on a larger scale. 8 men received the Medal of Honor for Peleliu. 5 of the awards are posthumous, all of them for Marines who smothered grenades with their own bodies to save the men beside them. Louis Bowsell on the first day, then Charles Roan, John New, Richard Krause, and Wesley Phelps. A 6th man, Lieutenant Carlton Rao, did the same thing and lived. Among the living recipients, alongside Everett Pope of Hill 100, is Private First Class Arthur Jackson of the 7th Marines, who on September 18th attacked a fortified position alone, destroyed a pillbox holding some 35 defenders, and then continued along the line, wiping out 11 more positions and some 50 defenders before the day ended. 9 of the combat cameramen who filmed the footage in this film became casualties of the battles they were recording. Then there is the question the men themselves asked. The airfield that justified the invasion never plays a significant part in the war that follows. The Philippines landings proceed on an accelerated schedule, approved while Peleliu was still being fought. Of all the objectives of Operation Stalemate, the one that matters is the one Halsey wanted kept. Ulithi, taken on September 23rd without a shot, becomes the largest fleet anchorage in the world and the staging base for the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Most historians since have agreed with the Admiral, who tried to call the operation off 2 days before it began. Peleliu could have been bypassed and left to starve like Rabaul. Nimitz's defenders note only that the machinery of the invasion was already in motion and that stopping it would have carried risks of its own. The men who fought there learned the verdict later, in print. The 1st Marine Division sailed back to its rest camp at Pavuvu to absorb replacements and rebuild. 6 months later, the division, with Sledge and the survivors of K Company in its ranks, landed on Okinawa against a defense built on the lessons the Japanese drew from Peleliu. A record of a different kind came off the island with the Life magazine artist Tom Lee, who landed on D-Day with an early wave of the 7th Marines and spent 32 hours ashore. From what he saw on the beaches, he painted 2 of the war's most reproduced images: a Marine dying in the sand. At the moment, a shell fragment strikes him, which he titled "The Price," and the face of a man at the end of his endurance, eyes fixed on nothing, which became known as the 2,000-yard stare. Eugene Sledge came off the island with K Company and carried it for the rest of his life. His memoir records what 74 days there did to men on both sides: the souvenir hunting among the dead, the numbness, the things he saw done and nearly did himself. He wrote it down, he said, in fulfillment of an obligation he had long felt to the men of the 1st Marine Division, none of whom came out unscathed. The battlefield itself kept the war going, longest of all. In April 1947, 2 years and 5 months after the island was declared secure, 34 Japanese soldiers under Lieutenant A. Yamaguchi walked out of the caves of the Umurbrogol and surrendered. A retired Japanese admiral, Michio Sumikawa, had been brought to the island to convince them the war was over, and it took the emperor's surrender, rescript in his hands, to do it. They were, by most reckonings, among the last organized Japanese forces of the Second World War to lay down their arms. The caves they came out of are still there.